Okay.
Start recording.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining us for, I should have gone back to calculate. This is now the 4th anniversary practically of when we started these Occ-COVIDs in 2020. And we've been trying to bring information about what's happening with infectious disease in general and COVID specifically, and particularly about its impact on workplaces, and even more particularly how we can prevent and mitigate the harm that's related to infectious disease in workplaces large and small. So today, again, we're going to talk about pandemic preparedness in general. We're going to look at a new tool from the World Health Organization, their new risk assessment, and Kevin's going to lead us through that. And then we have Joey Fox here, who's going to give an update on some of the latest HVAC guidance that's sort of crystallized out of the pandemic, and that we're hoping to see applied more widely across workplaces and buildings. And we're also going to talk a little bit about UV and what the opportunities are in Canada and some of the challenges, and then any other discussion or questions that you have for the speaker. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to do the first presentation. Thanks.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks, Val. Yeah, this is Occ-COVID Year 5, Pandemic Preparedness, New Risk Assessment and Indoor Air Quality Solutions. Just to lead into the discussion, the Public Policy Forum, I provided a hyperlink there in the very first paragraph. So at the time of publication, COVID-19 had killed over 53,000 Canadians. Then they say that the probability of another pandemic occurring within one's lifetime is roughly 38%, very close to 1 in 2, and may even grow to an extraordinary 76% within the next few decades. And respiratory pathogens such as COVID and influenza will likely be the cause due to their high mutation rates and their transmissibility. So I've just gone to nextstrain.org there. Garcia shared this in a previous presentation. And if you just look at the mutation of both SARS-CoV-2 and influenza, it's kind of really blown out, hasn't it? Like if you look at the 2024 different types of COVID there, it's really kind of scary, and those kind of odds, that's why I put a dice there on it as well. So I'm hosting this webinar, as Val said. I'll be talking a bit about the WHO risk assessment tool and the importance of monitoring carbon dioxide. And yeah, I'm really excited. Joey Fox has agreed to return again. So, and those of you who haven't met Joey, he's the chair of the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, or that should be OSPI, sorry, not OPSI, Indoor Air Quality Advisory Group. He will cover ensuring good indoor air quality, mitigating airborne disease with ASHRAE 241 and the use of ultraviolet. I've just kind of taken that nextstrain.org and just provided the hyperlink there to it again, just blown it up a bit. And I've also included Ebola there, and also monkeypox. And we did have Professor Raina McIntyre on a previous webinar, and she did talk about EpiWatch. So it looks like they're using artificial intelligence to scan it now to see, for new, future pandemics. I want to talk to you about this new risk assessment tool from the World Health Organization. And so, who have actually really now come out to say that we need to really mitigate airborne transmission. So they have this online tool. I actually did go through the tool again this morning. This is through the World Health Organization. So it's all of the different countries around the world. And when you go through the tool itself, it is actually quite intuitive. Like it asks you for which country you're at, which city you're at, what the temperature humidity is, what the variant is. You know, it's an indoor tool, so it's actually looking for the dimension of the space, duration, how long you'll be in there. Typically, it can be used for an event if there's a meeting event. And what it does, it assumes that there's one infectious person in the room. It also asks for vaccination status and booster status, you know, and then if there's breaks. What you do need to know is the air changes per hour. You do need to know something about the ventilation, and you do need to know, if you do use an air purifier, you need to know the clean air delivery rate. Then, you know, basically it asks you if there's a mask, and it talks about different kinds of masks and also activities. So this would kind of probably be a workshop in itself just to step you through the tool. And Joey might want to comment it too when he gets to talk, but it is actually an easy to use tool, and it does identify important interventions, and it can inform decisions that can significantly reduce the risk of transmission. I'm part of, as a few of us are, part of the Canadian Aerosol Transmission Coalition. So this is a volunteer organisation that's chaired by Alec Farquhar, who many will know, and Stefan Belladou, who is like Joey, a professional engineer as well. The Canadian Aerosol Transmission Coalition have identified 5 key areas for pandemic preparedness: applying the precautionary principle, strive for elimination versus mitigation, ensure a multi-layered prevention approach, address the disproportionate impact of pandemics on people in vulnerable situations, and strengthen the institutional framework for pandemic planning and response. So, you know, we have groups for the Canadian Aerosol Transmission looking at each of these areas. I'm in group 3, and Kathleen Gadd actually leads that group. We have talked about different layers of prevention, and we did actually talk about using upper UV to disinfect, you know, viruses, and that's probably what the trigger of this webinar has been. But we really need to ensure a multi-layered prevention approach. You know, vaccinations are necessary, but not sufficient. There is no silver bullet. More is needed. It really does take good ventilation to the ASHRAE Standard and filtering the virus from indoor air. It also requires an effective respiratory protection program stipulated in the Canadian Standard Association Standard. And, you know, this multi-layered approach with input from occupational health specialists was recommended by Justice Campbell, you know, with SARS-1. So here we are, SARS-2, many years after, and we still need to learn the lessons from the past. You know, it saves lives, prevents illness, and reduces closures of business and schools, thus reducing the resulting polarization and economic and social impacts.
Kevin,
Yes?
are you advancing your slides at all? Because we're still only seeing the first one.
Yes, I am.
So maybe you should try to stop sharing and share again, or or send them to me in an email.
Okay.
Now we just see it. Now it advanced. So that's where we see the Cat C one right now. Do you want to keep advancing? See if you can.
How's that?
No, we're still seeing only slide 4.
How's that?
Now we see slide 5. Okay.
Okay. Looks like I'm just going to have to not put it in slideshow. So I did talk about the 5 areas of pandemic preparedness, and I did talk about the multi-layered prevention approach, and the Canadian Aerosol Transmission Coalition have broken up in teams, and I'm on team 3 with Kathleen Gadd. We did talk about the layered prevention strategy, and you know, Ash, can you see that, Val? Okay.
Yes, ASHRAE 241 we're seeing.
Yeah, so ASHRAE 241, which is control of infectious aerosols, now provides requirements to clean the air. And using carbon dioxide real-time as a surrogate to assess the quality of the air will further indicate triggers and interventions required to clean the air. And been in the position of OCAV for not long after the pandemic, to use this color coding system for to as indicators what's an acceptable level for carbon dioxide. So typically less than 600 parts per million is what we really need to aim for. And then, between 600 and 800, there's a possible problem, and then 800 to 1,000 probable problem, and then more outdoor air is needed. There are hyperlinks there, and there's some very new information that's come from the University of Bristol. And there is a YouTube video that goes with that. But what this research, Haddrell, has demonstrated that as the CO2 goes up, then the pH in the droplets that we exhale that are airborne, the pH goes down. So actually the droplets become more acidic. And with the droplets becoming more acidic, it means that the virus will not decay as quickly. So it's kind of new research. It's brand new. It probably needs a lot more work, but it's really just reinforcing the importance of, keeping the CO2 levels low, not only as a surrogate for the ventilation, but also when the CO2 goes up, the pH of the droplet, the acidity in the droplet goes down, and then the virus lasts longer in the droplet. Thinking about using a CO2 monitor, it's really an indicator of fresh air. So if you use a CO2 monitor, and you get a higher level above, say, 800, then really, it can open windows to reduce the carbon dioxide. It's also about talking to a building manager, asking about the HVAC system, and then, making sure that the air is being filtered. Really there should be a MERV 13 or better filtration system in the hard ventilation system. But if it's not, or in combination with that, you can put an air purifier in. But I just want to make a point here that carbon dioxide is what we breathe out. Carbon dioxide is a gas. Air purifiers they filter out particulate. So the air purifiers won't reduce carbon dioxide, but by measuring carbon dioxide, what that does, it shows that you need to do something about the ventilation and also filter the air. Most people seem to be carrying around these ARIA now. I have one. It's what they call a non-dispersive infrared CO2 monitor. So it's the most accurate that's there. It data logs, and you can sync it with your iPhone or with an iPad, and you can look at the data real time. And you can also look at decay curves. So for example, if you have a CO2 monitor in a room full of people, when the people leave that room at the end of the day, you can actually look at how quick the CO2 levels drop. And the quicker the CO2 levels drop, the higher the air changes per hour. So it's probably a screen also to look for air changes per hour. You're better off to measure the air coming in and going out of the room, but CO2 monitors can also be used to look at decay curves, as just as a kind of a screen for the ventilation rate. If your CO2 levels are elevated, you can either leave the premises, you can air out, provide more fresh air, and include MERV 13 or greater filters in the air conditioning system, and with air purifiers as well. So this was a paper that I came across about using CO2 monitors also as an indicator of the risk for healthcare workers to be infected with tuberculosis. So this study has actually, looked at healthcare workers using these monitors, and what they show is there's a lower risk for TB infection with lower CO2 levels. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about upper room UV or upper room germicidal UV. And this was a slide from a previous study, but there has been some research done by Edward Nardell from Harvard, and they have found that using upper room GUV, germicidal ultraviolet radiation, was about 9.4 times more cost effective than mechanical ventilation for the same amount of air disinfection. Which kind of brings me on to talk about and introduce everybody to Joey. I kind of, as I went through the previous webinars, I realized that this is the fourth webinar. This is number 4 that Joey's actually joined in on and has been prepared to share his knowledge. Joey's a professional engineer with over 10 years in heating and ventilation and air conditioning in industry specializing in schools. He's currently the chair of the Indoor Air Quality Advisory Committee for the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. He has a website called It's Airborne, and I highly recommend that you have a look at his website because he really does keep track of what's going on, and he's trying to educate people through his website. And I had a look this morning, and Joey's actually got some information there about using carbon layers in air purifiers and the pros and cons. And, it's, if you think about volatile organic compounds like the organics, the vapors in the air, where there's odor problems. And, for example, in nail salons, the products have organic compounds that can evaporate. If there's a very small amount of activated carbon in the air purifier, then it won't be effective. And when you read the information now, when you look at what Joey's provided, and Joey might want to add a bit more to this later on, you'll probably find that the air purifier might not be effective for VOC because the activated carbon will get saturated very quickly. Just with the Indoor Air Quality Advisory Group, they have some fabulous guidance there as well that you can look at. And like I said, we've ran, this is number 4 webinar with Joey. The first one was Clean Air Really Matters. So that was just between myself and Joey Fox. The second one was Let's Hear It from the Engineers. Hooray for the engineers, because they want to control exposure, and very critical that we have a interdisciplinary approach. So we also had Marianne Levitsky, who's another occupational hygienist, and Stefan Bilodeau. So if you want to kind of go back and look at what we've done before, you can see these webinars. And really not that long ago, August 2023, we did have a webinar on back to school safety. So that's it. I just got to stop sharing here. Okay, I've stopped sharing. So I've also reached out to a couple of people with expertise in UV to see if they join. There is a person by the name of Michael Downs who might have joined. I haven't actually looked to see whether he's here, but he's the section head of the Pest Management Regulatory Agency with Health Canada. And Joey shared this information with me some time ago. His section actually is responsible for approving UV devices to disinfect the air. I also invited Richard Vincent from the US, and he's lead of the ASHRAE GPC 37 for the guidelines for the application of upper room UV germicidal, UVC actually, devices to control the transmission of infectious aerosols. So I just want to welcome Joey, and thanks, Joey, again for joining and sharing your knowledge with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So let me just share my screen. Yes. Are you able to see the screen?
Yep, it's not in presenter mode yet. Perfect.
Okay.
Great,
Okay.
thanks.
So I'm going to speak about an Indoor Air Quality Act, ASHRAE 241, the standard that recently came out to mitigate airborne disease transmission, and the use of UV for air disinfection within the context of ASHRAE 241. Just to start off, we have many issues with our current buildings and the current system. One, for existing buildings, there really are no required standards. Once a building is built, then updates in building codes don't apply to existing buildings unless there is a major retrofit. And many buildings, the systems don't even comply with current standards for ventilation if they were designed and built at a time earlier when the standards were different and the standards were lower. Another major problem we have is we are unprepared for hazardous events. So when it comes to pandemics, our buildings are not designed to mitigate airborne transmission. And when it comes to poor outdoor air quality events like wildfire smoke, as we had last year, our buildings are not designed to actually mitigate that. So we live ourselves with no resilience, no current standards. And furthermore, we have no assurance that our buildings are healthy and safe. We do not have requirements, legal requirements on how they are operated. Within engineering standards, there are requirements, and there is piecework legislation that you could find in various fields. But overall, there's very little accountability and there is no requirements. One example I could say is my kids' daycare, the carbon dioxide levels were 2,500 parts per million. The ventilation was off. The units were broken. When I asked them to fix it, they just said no, and I had absolutely no recourse. Furthermore, there's no transparency. Unless you're carrying around your own carbon dioxide monitor, or you know how to kind of assess systems by looking at them, by being in the room, which maybe some engineers are able to, but the vast majority of people cannot, you have no idea what's actually happening with the air you're breathing. Also, a lot of the guidance that has come out from public health agencies for improving indoor air quality, it doesn't necessarily take climate change or energy conservation into account. There are engineering standards now that you can use in order to try to balance all of these things together. I'll start with the Clean Indoor Air Act. If we want to ensure people are actually provided with clean indoor air, the right way to do it is to measure the air to see if there are pollutants in it. And if the pollutant levels are too high, then the building owners need to take action to lower those pollutants. So we have a similar situation with clean water. We test the water, and if there's any pollutants that are harmful, we take actions immediately to fix it. With clean food, there are regulations and there's frequent inspections to make sure that the food that we are eating is safe. But we have nothing like that for air. There was a model act created by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and it goes through essentially how it should be legislated. It doesn't specifically state what pollutants to test for, but the main components requires the creation of a committee, some system in place to go around and test the air for various pollutants. It has the ability for occupants to lodge complaints. These complaints can lead to investigations and possibly inspections, required remediation, and also consequences if these remedial steps are not taken. And also it provides transparency by whatever the results you measure are, those have to be displayed and accessible to the occupants. This is really what would be required on a societal scale to ensure that people are provided with clean air. Now, there was actually a recent paper published by a bunch of experts listing a lot of the recommended pollutants to test for and what levels they should be at. So they included carbon dioxide, they included fine particulate matter, as well as volatile organic compounds. Those are really some of the initial ones you would target. I'm going to speak a little more detail about carbon dioxide now. So carbon dioxide can actually have now, I believe, 4 uses. One use, we've discussed many of them before. The one that a lot of people are doing is they're using it just to see what the risk of airborne disease transmission is. Now, carbon dioxide used in this way has its limitations. It does indicate what % of the air you're breathing is rebreathed from other people. So the more people are breathing, the more carbon dioxide is emitted into the air. When you have outdoor air supplied to the space, which is ventilation, it reduces the carbon dioxide levels. So if you have a lot of outdoor air and not so much rebreathed air, overall, all else being equal, there's going to be much lower risk of airborne disease transmission, since airborne diseases transmit through inhaling air that was exhaled by other people. The main limitation for this is not all air cleaning comes from outdoor air. And outdoor air actually is the most energy inefficient way to clean the air. Using methods like filtration or UV are much more energy efficient. You could still have high carbon dioxide levels, but if you have lots of air cleaning through filtration or UV, then you could still have a low risk environment. So using carbon dioxide to measure the risk of airborne disease transmission, it can be very helpful. It has its limitations. It's also important to note that in most buildings, there isn't good filtration or UV. The only method that's being used really is ventilation. Even if the ventilation is broken, there's going to be leakage through windows and through the building envelope. So there's some ventilation. So carbon dioxide can be a very helpful tool in those cases. Another use for carbon dioxide, which a lot of people mix up, and it's really not what we need to focus on, is that carbon dioxide could be harmful at 5,000 parts per million or higher. That's not found most places. If you're using it as part of industrial processes or something like that, then it could occur. A lot of times people say, oh, carbon dioxide's less than 5,000, therefore it's safe. That's not what carbon dioxide is being used for. The most important use of carbon dioxide, in my opinion, right now, is to verify the ventilation rate. So outdoor airflow rate can be measured from carbon dioxide. Now, in our indoor air quality standards, there are required ventilation rates. So we can actually verify the system is operating according to the indoor air quality standards by monitoring the carbon dioxide. So we could set various limits on various spaces based on what the carbon dioxide level should be if the space is complying with indoor air quality standards. And when used like this, the carbon dioxide is a tracer gas. It tells you whether or not other pollutants in the space are likely to be at higher concentrations that could be harmful. This could include infectious aerosols, but also volatile organic compounds. The last use of carbon dioxide, which Kevin touched on, is there's new research that low CO2 levels can lead to very high decay rate for viruses. Now, there are many different technologies that people have tried to use to make viruses decay quickly. A lot of these, the air cleaners that supply these radicals to the space, whether it's photocatalytic oxidation or hydrogen peroxide, or a lot of these other hydroxyl generators, things like that, they try to make the virus decay quicker. Now, possibly low CO2 can be a tool that's used. I still think that a little more research is needed to properly identify how effective this can be, but it's definitely something that should be looked out for. I'm going to now just briefly control infectious aerosols, ASHRAE 241. Throughout the pandemic, we have not had a proper standard of how much clean air needs to be supplied. The general guidance was just increase the amount of ventilation and improve filtration. But really to what level was not provided, and it leads to equity issues, and also, maybe some places are being over-ventilated and you're spending too much energy, and other places we need to focus and we need to spend more energy there. So IAQ standards, ASHRAE 62.1, it's not designed for airborne disease mitigation. Now, it's designed for pollutants that are known to be in the air. Airborne diseases are not known to be in the air. They're only there when an infectious person is there, and often there is no infectious person there. So you can't really use the Indoor Air Quality Act method to verify it, because you could be measuring, first of all, it's very difficult to measure virus particles in the air, but even if you could, it's not going to be a constant thing over time. Not like VOCs or CO2, where all else being equal, you're going to have similar levels on a constant basis. Infectious aerosols does not work that way. So ASHRAE 241 is developed to control infectious aerosols. There's lots of guidance, but what a lot of people have been focusing on, and the most important, is the rates that are provided, which are far in excess of what currently is required by the building code. Now, ASHRAE 241 isn't required all the time. It's only when either public health or the building operator wants to operate in what's called infection risk management mode. So you don't need to manage the infection risk all the time legally according to ASHRAE 241, but at least it provides guidance. And if someone wants to say we're providing a safe and healthy environment from mitigating airborne disease transmission, then they should be following this standard. The rates in ASHRAE 241 tend to be much higher. I've given an example of an elementary school where the requirement for air cleaning from ASHRAE 241 is 20 liters per second per person, whereas the outdoor air ventilation rate from 62.1, which is the indoor air quality standard, is closer to around 7 to 8 liters per second per person, much lower. So overall, the tools we have to improve indoor air quality, the first and the primary one is ventilation, that's supplying outdoor air. And that gets rid of all indoor air pollutants. The main one that's dealt with in the indoor air quality standards are volatile organic compounds, but also infectious aerosols ventilation can remove. Filtration is the next tool that we have. It removes particles by passing them through a filter. So like Kevin said, it doesn't affect carbon dioxide or any gases. It only affects particulate matter. And infectious aerosols are part of that, but also, as we've seen, wildfire smoke and outdoor air pollution, the most harmful pollutants are particulate matter. Now, another tool I'm going to discuss now in more detail is ultraviolet light. So it disinfects pathogens in the air. So they're still floating around, but they've been inactivated so they can't harm you. There are many different ways to use UV light. Some are effective, some are ineffective. So I'm going to go into that in more detail. Upper room UV and far UV, which I'm going to discuss, are the more effective methods, but currently they're not allowed in Canada. They're being regulated and nothing has been approved. There's also alternative air cleaners. So I mentioned this, there's ionization, photocatalytic oxidation, hydrogen peroxide, hydroxyl generators, and many other of these technologies. They technically, I believe, should also be regulated in Canada, but they are being sold, where UV devices are often being pulled from the market. These devices are still being sold. I know many ionization companies have been trying to sell to me as being part of a school board, even though they're regulated. ASHRAE 241 provides a method to know whether or not air cleaning equipment is safe and effective. I have not seen a single one of these alternative air cleaners actually pass ASHRAE 241. Unfortunately, upper room UV and far UV have also not passed the requirements for ASHRAE 241. I'll discuss that in a little more detail later. Okay, so when discussing the use of ultraviolet light, you need to make sure not to mix up the different ways it can be used. So one way to do it is to put ultraviolet lights in air handling units. You can see a picture here on the right of two different places that ultraviolet light is used. The bottom box here is the main part of the air handling unit. The end is the fan, and you can see the UV lights placed beside the coils. Generally, they're placed by cooling coils. When you cool the air, humidity in the air condenses, and you could, once you get water on coils, you could get mold growth. So that could lead to poor air quality, supplying mold to the space. So it has been used in the past to place UV lights by cooling coils in order to prevent mold growth. Generally, when done like this, it doesn't give a high dose to the virus particles of UV, so it's not necessarily that effective at disinfecting the air. The other way you could use UV is, you can see on the top, it's placed in the duct, and air that passes by it, if there's pathogens in there, it can be disinfected. Speaking to experts, one that were on the ASHRAE 241 committee, who said that in general, this does not work. You just do not have enough contact time and enough UV supplied exposed to the virus to actually disinfect it. Furthermore, in my opinion, one of the first steps that should be done is upgrading filtration to MERV 13 filters. Once you're cleaning recirculated air with MERV 13 filters, adding in a second method is it's going to provide diminishing returns. So I really don't think that UV in air handling units is one of the primary methods that should be considered for disinfecting the air and compliance with ASHRAE 241, in my personal opinion, as a cost-effective method. Another way UV can be used is inside portable air cleaners. So portable air cleaners usually have a filter, often it's a HEPA filter, but it can be using another technology that can clean the air. So UV is sometimes used. In my opinion, again, if you're using a technology with a portable air cleaner, filtration is a better technology because it also protects you from particulate matter, which UV would not. There's also the same issue of low contact time. where the air might be just passing through, and even though it's being exposed to some UV, it's not necessarily enough to disinfect the virus. So it can be used, it can be effective, but I don't think it's the best use of UV. Now, there's two other technologies that I'll discuss in more detail. One is upper room UV and one is far UV. Both of these are in-room lighting systems. So you are supplying UV light into a room. Now, once you're doing that, there are additional safety issues that need to be taken into account. They can both be used in a safe and effective way, but it's not just trust us, it needs to be done properly. Also, as I discussed, a UV photocatalytic oxidation, what you're doing is you're supplying UV. Often it's used inside portable air cleaners, but UV is being exposed to some catalyst. I believe it's usually titanium dioxide, and it causes a chemical reaction in the air. Sometimes it advertises as creating hydroxyl radicals. Sometimes it advertises as creating gaseous hydrogen peroxide. But either way, you're supplying different chemicals to the air. The goal is to hopefully disinfect the air and remove virus particles from the air on the one hand, and on the other hand, not to create any harmful chemistry in the air that reduces indoor air quality for occupants. If they would comply with ASHRAE 241, then we would know how effective it is, and we would also know that it's safe. Currently, that's not the case, and I haven't seen any evidence that using this type of technology is both safe and effective. So for the time being, especially as long as there's no compliance with ASHRAE 241, I would strongly recommend against these. The other way to use UV is to disinfect surfaces or water. So if someone's looking for a air disinfection technology, but they're just placing UV lights in a room, unless it's upper room UV or far UV, often you cannot be in the room when the UV light is on. So that's not effective at disinfecting the air. When you want to protect people from airborne diseases, you need to clean the air while people are in the room. Cleaning the air in unoccupied rooms is not helpful for that. So in more detail, upper room UV, this is a picture from the CDC. You have these devices, they have UV lights, and the goal is to shine UV above everyone's head. Now, some UV does leak down into the room, but there are limits set by occupational hygienists as to how much UV you can be exposed to safely. So as long as you remain underneath those limits, then there is no safety issue. For example, the average fluorescent light you have, which these UV lights are fluorescent lights, they just don't have the phosphor coating, but fluorescent lights also supply UV to the space. It's well under the safety limits, so there's no concern about that. But you have a similar situation for upper room UV. People have been hurt generally because one, the devices are installed upside down, so everyone is exposed to UV. And two, there hasn't been anyone actually checking to make sure it's installed safely. So you have to make sure these systems are installed safely. It's important to note for upper room UV and for far UV, I believe it was Ed Haddrell who said this, but in the past 100 years, hundreds of millions of people have been killed from airborne diseases, and 0 people have been permanently hurt from upper room UV or far UV. There have been cases where people are hurt, but based on the type of UV light, it's not permanent damage. So you have to be careful with it. But when you're looking at the risks of airborne diseases versus this technology, which has been shown to be extremely effective, this technology definitely deserves strong consideration. Based on research from Ed Haddrell, you can get around 20 to 30 air changes per hour from using upper room UV, where with ventilation and filtration, usually you could get 2 to 5 air changes per hour. There's been many studies, whether it comes measles, TB, influenza, and COVID. It's been shown to be effective in all of them. One problem still, I'll say this again, an issue with all of the upper room UV fixtures, which to me is really, it's unfortunate. None of them have proved compliance with ASHRAE 241 yet. So I'm really hoping that will happen soon. RUV is another technology. Now, the upper room UV fixtures use the standard 254 nanometer UV light, which you get from low pressure mercury lamps, which are the same as the fluorescent lamps. There are special types of lamps that have been created using krypton chlorine excimer lamps, and they emit light at 222 nanometers. What's special about that light is it does not penetrate deep into your skin. So the outer layer of dead skin and the tear layer over your eye is really enough to pretty much stop it. And all that means is you could actually supply a much higher dose of UV to the space before there are any harmful effects on people's skin or eyes, which means you can illuminate a room with far UV and you could get extremely high clean air disinfection rate. You can see here, this was a picture from the White House Conference on Indoor Air Quality. On the right-hand side, there's an upper room UV fixture. It looks bluish. And behind Dr. Ashish Jha, who was the COVID-19 task force coordinator for the White House, there are two far UV fixtures. As far as effectiveness and safety, there was actually another experiment done similarly, where it showed in the hundreds of air changes per hour, but there's been multiple of these experiments showing that you can get hundreds of air changes per hour by supplying far UV to a space. So this is far in excess of any other technology we currently have. And all these are within the limits of what's safe for the skin. Now, again, this technology, it has not shown compliance with ASHRAE 241. In order, even not ASHRAE 241, but ASHRAE 62.1, the standard for indoor air quality, any fixture that any technology that's being used, it has to show no ozone production. And the standard is UL 2998 for no ozone. There have been upper room UV fixtures that have shown compliance with UL 2998. There have yet to be any far UV fixtures that show compliance with UL 2998. Again, it's unfortunate that we haven't had these safety standards being met yet. So regulation for these, I think it should be there. But at the same time, because of the effectiveness of this technology, we really should try to make it as easy as possible that once it's shown to be safe, we should be able to use them. And again, ASHRAE 241 is the standard we should be using to ensure that it's safe and effective. So that's everything I have for now. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll pass it back over to Kevin.
Thank you so much, Joey, as always. This is the fourth time, and you know, I always learn so much when you come back and share your knowledge, and I'm sure everybody else does. And I just want to thank also when I sent an email to Michael Downs, he said he would join, so I can see that Michael's here as well. And I hope to engage Michael in some of the conversations as well. And this is kind of as far as my knowledge goes with the upper UV devices. You know, there's the safety risk, as you mentioned, Joey, that is probably minuscule compared to the infection risk. But with the far UVC device, my understanding is that it's about the ozone that's generated. And I'm pretty sure when I looked at ASHRAE 241, I think the limit that it used was five parts per billion. But when I look at I'm not sure about the ministry exposure limits, but the ACGIH exposure limits 0.05 ppm, which works out at 50 ppb, which is kind of quite a lot higher. And that's for workplaces, obviously. I'm sure in residential settings, then that lower level is very important. But do you think that could be? And maybe I'll just bring you into the conversation too, Michael. But for yourself, Joey, what do you think might be the limiting factor here? They talk about UV devices being used for decades, like for TB example, in healthcare settings, and overseas, you look at the amount of UV devices that are used there. I'm wondering why they're not being broadly used in Canada, and maybe is it the ozone that's generated? I'm not sure. Do you want to start off on that, and then Michael might want to chime in?
Okay, I could start off. There was someone here. She might not be here anymore. Megan McNulty, who's actually the chair of ASHRAE 62.1, and also was on 241 committee. She would be much more educated to speak about this than me. But say this: there are two standards for safety when it comes to ozone. One is UL 867, I believe, which is low ozone, and the cutoff is 50 parts per billion. And one is 2998, which is zero ozone, and the cutoff is 5 parts per billion. I believe ACGIH states UL 867 and 50 parts per billion. California also to sell has to have UL 867 and 50 parts per billion. ASHRAE requires UL 2998. So both 62.1 and 241 require the 5 parts per billion. Whether or not ASHRAE should change their standard and instead reference UL 867 to 50 parts per billion, that's not something I can say, like, in my opinion, they should do it either way. That might be something that the committee can consider. But right now, just as an engineer who follows the engineering standards, the standards now from ASHRAE are UL 2998.
Thanks, Joey. And I do see Megan's name here and the invitees, or the attendees list. So if you had anything to offer, this is kind of a forum, like it's an open discussion. Megan, we're just trying to learn from each other. It's like COVID conversations. So I don't know if you had anything to add to that. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
So, yes, people can mute and unmute, but I don't actually see Megan.
I see her name
It was
there.
here before. She might not have been able to stay for the whole.
Oh, maybe she's left. Okay, then.
And the same thing with Michael. His name's on the list, but it's actually is not in the meeting. It's just because when the invitation went out, WebEx recognized his account. But I don't think he's here.
Okay. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Anybody else that has studied this quite a bit as well, that want to share what they know or be part of this discussion?
Tracy's posted in the chat. Tracy, do you want to comment on your post of the LEED standard?
Now I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Yeah, a colleague of mine was telling me this morning about the new proposed LEED version 5 green building standard, and that there's a new credit for resilient spaces, and it has several options for how you can meet that credit. And one of the options is for designing your building to respond to outdoor ambient air events. So that would be things like wildfire smoke or other high pollution situations. And another option is to meet ASHRAE 241 for infectious disease management. And I'm wondering, what are the main technical differences between those two guidelines?
So I can answer that. We don't have an official standard yet on how to mitigate outdoor air pollution. In general, the guidance is to use MERV 13 filters. Whether or not carbon filtration should be added to it, currently there's no real specific guidance around it. In those type of situations, outdoor air, volatile organic compounds can be more harmful. So it might be something to consider. But really, it's just MERV 13 filters, use of that, and try to limit ventilation as much as possible. Try to strike a balance between indoor air generated pollutants and minimizing ventilation, because you don't want to bring in the outdoor air pollution. As far as infectious aerosols, now we're in a much better situation. We have the standard ASHRAE 241, and it's just following the standard. MERV 13 filters, one, they protect against outdoor air pollution. If you're recirculating air, they also provide additional air cleaning from infectious aerosols. So they have both those benefits, which is why MERV 13 filter really it's an extremely cost-effective method to clean the air and provide a healthier space.
So in meeting guideline 44, would you accidentally kind of meet a lot of what's in 241 if you're dealing with a closed system versus just using fresh air for your main benefit?
Yeah. Oh, so there is a proposed, or maybe it might be out now. But yeah, it's not a standard; it's a guideline. So it kind of says what should be done. I don't think it comes out with a final solution about what to do for ventilation. Now, there are many cases where all you have to do is put in MERV 13 filters, and you will comply with ASHRAE 241. In general, lower lower occupancy spaces, it would be much easier. For places like classrooms or high density spaces, MERV 13 filters are unlikely to get you all the way there. You would probably need additional in-room cleaning, but it's definitely a first good step. It will help with guideline. So the guideline 44, there's a difference between ASHRAE standards and guidelines. Guidelines are general guidance, where standards are much more concrete and have more requirements to meet it.
I guess it's
Guidelines aren't usually adapted to building code where standards can be.
Right. Okay. So in terms of looking at, because LEED, the reason I'm asking is LEED is such a huge market driver. And it's great that they've included 241, but including it as part of a suite of 4 options, I'm just trying to understand whether it's going to end up getting lost in the crowd or whether LEED 5 actually could really help advance implementation of 241 and codification.
That I can't comment on like how successful there's a lot of LEED buildings, so it's definitely a huge step forward to have these referenced in LEED to at least acknowledge future resilience of buildings. Obviously, both of these should be taken care of. One, pandemic preparation, and also being prepared to deal with wildfire and outdoor air quality events.
Thanks.
So, Joey, have you gone through the World Health Organization indoor risk assessment at all? Have you actually gone?
Not the risk assessment, no.
Oh, and I'm just kind of just speaking out loud here. I'm just thinking out loud, really. You know, with the requirements for the risk management mode for ASHRAE 241, a lot of people will say, well, what is that? Like, when do you invoke 241? It's kind of a bit grey. And I'm just wondering whether this WHO indoor risk assessment might be a good tool to use to figure out whether, that's the time when ASHRAE 241 should be invoked. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
ASHRAE deliberately did not state when you should invoke ASHRAE 241. They left this up to public health authorities, the authority having jurisdiction, or the building owner and operator. So any of those can say, okay, we need to operate buildings in infection risk management mode, and then you would essentially flip a switch and you would have the higher clean air delivery rates that are required in ASHRAE 241 versus just what's normally required as ventilation in ASHRAE 62.1. So ASHRAE doesn't say when that should happen.
Do you have any thoughts on that or not, or you just don't? It's kind of like more up to the public health professionals and the health and safety professionals and the building managers to make that call using kind of professional judgment, I guess.
And in my personal opinion, people should be protected from airborne diseases all the time. These diseases aren't going away, so we should be providing clean air delivery rates that are capable of mitigating airborne transmission all the time. And if you deal with the design carefully, you can have an energy efficient design. It's not going to be like crazy usage. You could easily design buildings to comply with this, especially if we had upper room UV or far UV the ability to use those. It would be very easy to comply with even the higher rates of ASHRAE 241. In some places are going to be extremely difficult to comply. You think about some like places of worship, restaurants where you could have high density people, like clubs. That's going to be very difficult. Classrooms you can do without with careful design. Some spaces are going to be very easy. Office spaces should be very easy. Most commercial spaces should actually be pretty easy to comply with ASHRAE 241. If upper room UV and far UV would be very helpful technologies in the more difficult spaces, but I think people should be protected all the time from airborne diseases.
Thanks, Joey. We might open up to the floor. If anybody has a question, please show yourself and ask it. It's probably better in person than just in the chat box there. So if anybody wants to join in the discussion, ask a question. Val, you're showing yourself, so you had a question.
I have a couple questions, I guess. One, just around upper room UV seems to be allowed in the US. Is there a model? And because I've seen reference to it sort of events specifically, like, oh, there's a banquet, and so we're going to outfit the hall so that the people who attend will be extra safe. And then also more, of course, it's used in healthcare, I know, and in other maybe environments. So I just wondered, Joey, if there's like, to what should we aspire? Are there regulations that already exist in the US that could be relatively easily lobbied for here or added to our, or is it, and I know it's that whole, is it federal versus provincial ends up being an issue sometimes too, but just wondered, I don't know the US regulatory regime that allows things there that aren't allowed here.
I don't think it's really, my understanding is it's not really that regulated. They can sell it. It's not, in Canada, it is more regulated and more careful. There is a lot of these garbage UV devices that are not properly filtered, and they could generate a lot of ozone. They could be harmful. So there are those products that hit the market, advertising there for COVID. I believe that's what incentivized Health Canada to regulate all UV devices. Just the problem is with these devices that have historical evidence that they are effective, we haven't been able to use them. So I think there's just less regulation in the US than there is in Canada when it comes to its use. Again, my personal opinion, ASHRAE 241 is the standard, but if it's not, then at least ASHRAE 62.1. So show that it produces no ozone, and then have a occupational hygienist or a engineer or an expert who's familiar with UV sign off on an installation to make sure it was installed in a safe way. And that in my opinion, that's what should be required for this.
Great, thanks. And I also had a question, you mentioned a few times in terms of VOCs and activated charcoal that, yeah, there seem to be more, I don't know if they're more or they're just differently presented. More recently, air cleaners, like freestanding portable air cleaners on the market that include or have the possibility of including activated charcoal. Like for instance, IKEA sells a pretty straightforward air cleaner, pretty basic, that you can buy with an activated charcoal as well as the filter and without. And my husband just showed me a Levoit one that he found, and I appreciate that activated charcoal in any kind of a fragrant environment or whatever, it's going to pick up like it's going to become saturated very quickly. But I don't know if you wanted to, Kevin mentioned what you've got posted on your website. I just wondered if you want to comment any further about, is it compromising the air cleaning? The particulate filters are not affected by the charcoal. It's just that you can't rely on the charcoal. Or are you saying, I guess, are the particulate filters compromised in any way by these hybrid air cleaners?
No, it doesn't affect, they're two separate things. Activated carbon charcoal is not effective against fine particulate matter.
Right.
And the filters are not effective against gases, which the activated carbon can be affected against. In fact, it's very possible that the activated carbon helps because it could act as a pre-filter. So it might filter out some of the larger pieces of dust, and those won't clog up the particulate filter, and the particulate filter will just do its job on the fine particulate matter. So it might actually help as a pre-filter in those cases. But depending on the amount of carbon, how quickly it saturates and how effective it will be changes. Now, in most situations, you do not need an activated carbon filter. The indoor air quality standards are designed to remove volatile organic compounds from the space to levels that are safe. So as long as you have standard ventilation, I wouldn't be too concerned about the VOCs, except having decent source control. So having a non-fragrant environment, for example, if someone's coming in with cologne or perfume, you could have a very high level of VOCs that are not just a nuisance, but also some people who have sensitivities, it could be very harmful. So having a good source control is important. But once that's the case, if you have standard ventilation, I wouldn't complicate things with additional activated carbon filters. They become helpful when outdoor air VOCs are a problem. Generally, they're not. Generally, outdoor air is much cleaner than indoor air. But if you have wildfire smoke, for example, if it smells really bad outside, then it's likely an outdoor air VOC problem.
If I can just add to that too, you know, when you sample for, you know, organic compounds in the air, one method is by using charcoal tubes. These are little glass tubes that have activated carbon in them. And you have a front section in the tube and you have a back section. And the idea is you analyze both the front and the back. And if the back section contains more than 5% of what's in the front, then there's been breakthrough of the organic, you know, compound through the front section. And it'd be interesting to see what the manufacturers are doing to demonstrate that the activated carbon, you know, is effective over a longer time. It wouldn't be too difficult for the manufacturers to set up some trials where they could measure the organic vapors behind the charcoal to see how much is breaking through. But that's the kind of detail that we'd be looking for, isn't it? That where we could be confident and use these activated carbon filters.
Yeah, that's the problem. There's very poor standardization for activated carbon filters. For example, with particulate filters, there's very clear standards for first pass efficiency, the rating system for the filters, and also we have good research showing how they perform over time. We don't have that with activated carbon filters. So a lot of it's kind of guesswork at this point. There is evidence that some of them saturate very quickly and don't last. There are ones that can last a long time. So we don't have that standardization yet. So that's a significant problem. Another reason why activated carbon is not really a primary tool for ensuring acceptable indoor air quality.
Thanks, Joey. Back to you, Val, or does anybody else have any questions? Like, we've got Joey here until 3 o'clock. You know, he's got so much experience and knowledge. So, you know, if anybody has any questions or thoughts, please share.
Well, it is Friday afternoon. We understand that too. I want follow up to that just because I noticed when I was looking further at the ones at IKEA before purchasing that the Cater rate actually is lower for the once you add the charcoal layer. It's presumably providing, as you said, pre-filtering, but then it's providing resistance, I assume. So with the same fan motor, you're actually getting potentially, I don't know, that was my theoretical that if you looked at it, that the Cater was actually different for the two devices by adding that charcoal filter. So that I'm just more cautioning people that it's, you know, like, I guess make sure first when you're looking up a Cater rate that it's for the exact version of the air cleaner that you're buying. And then the one other thing related to that, I was curious that IKEA sold them at all, actually. And then I wondered about in Europe where gas stoves, like cooking with gas, is so much more common and has been recognized as having health effects. I wondered if that was a reason why. Would that ever be a reason to add activated charcoal if you cook with gas?
So the harmful gas that's been attributed to the bad health effects from gas is nitrogen dioxide. A couple experts have weighed in saying that activated carbon is not really effective against nitrogen dioxide. There are some papers I've seen that said it is, but it can't really be relied upon. When you're cooking, one problem is the nitrogen dioxide from the gas. Other issue is, especially if you're frying, there's going to be a lot of particulate matter put into the air.
Yeah.
The best tool, obviously, having the particulate matter is a problem no matter what type of stove you're using, whether it's gas, whether it's electric. Obviously, having electric is better for the environment and to avoid the nitrogen dioxide. But the best tool is really use your range hood. Always make sure it's on. You use it as high as possible when you're cooking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
We've got a question that's just come in the chat from Mira Pazek. In an office environment that has a HVAC system, which results in a PM measurement of PM 2.5 of below 1 throughout the majority of the day, as measured with Airthings View Plus. I don't know that. What's the risk of infection from airborne illnesses during a period of high community transmission? So I guess PM 2.5 is the measure here. And
Yeah, so I'll say particulate matter. So there are limitations when using carbon dioxide to assess the risk of airborne disease transmission. Particulate matter has way more limitations and it's much less effective at assessing the risk. The reason for that is carbon dioxide is helpful because people emit carbon dioxide and people emit infectious aerosols. Carbon dioxide is removed from ventilation and infectious aerosols can be removed from ventilation. Particulate matter you find in the air is not respiratory. When you're measuring particulate matter, you're not measuring respiratory aerosols. You're measuring that's like dust, dead skin, material like fibers shedding from materials, or outdoor air pollution, or if you have anything generating particulate matter in the air, if you're burning candles or you're cooking, or smoking, which is also really bad. But there's lots of different sources for particulate matter. So the concentration of particulate matter in the air is related to the rate of filtration, but it's also related to the rate of generation. And where carbon dioxide is almost exclusively generated by people, particulate matter can be generated by lots of different things. So you cannot use really particulate matter to provide an accurate risk assessment for airborne disease transmission. It's not a good proxy for what the concentration of infectious aerosols would be in the air. Carbon dioxide is much more effective for that.
it's I know that Apricot Cafe, they rely heavily on particulate matter monitoring. They even have a barcode at the front of the cafe now that you can actually go with the barcode and you can get measures, but they don't seem to focus on CO2. They focus more on particulate, and maybe they sort of say, well, if our air purifiers working fully, then we should see lower particulate matter levels as well. But
so that's true, and also particulate matter is the most harmful pollutant in the air. So having low PM 2.5 indicates, at least from an indoor air quality perspective, general indoor air quality perspective, it makes it a much healthier space. So it's very helpful to monitor PM 2.5 to make sure it's at acceptable levels. When it's at high levels, it could be very harmful. Even in the immediate future, it could be harmful, but it's just not the best proxy for airborne disease transmission.
Well explained. Thanks, Joey. Any other questions there? And she said, got it. Thanks so much for clarifying that for me. I have a much better understanding now. The Airthings View Plus monitor also provides a PM1 measurement. Okay.
Two things, I can actually ask questions all day, of course, but I'm also, Tony's reminding me, we have a one question survey to find out if people found out any practical information that can impact on their workplace that I will invite you guys to complete. In fact, I'll get Tony to put it in, but that doesn't mean that we're turning off our mics or anything, but I will before people start to depart. But I guess, Joy, we've had you several times, and we're all part of this fight to try and get airborne transmission recognized, and to get clean indoor air as a health benefit, not just for infectious disease prevention or transmission prevention, but for health in general and cognitive health, and to have a standard. Just wondering if you're seeing any progress, or are there any lights in that, or are there places we should be still trying to influence, or any comments even just from last August when you shared it was back to school? Then we had kind of a mixed year. We had some peaks of transmission again at different parts of the school year. And then it's been simmering pretty low in terms of COVID in wastewater, but some states and some other countries have had surges again, we know. So just wondering what you're thinking about how things are going in this fight, I guess, more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, things have changed now. It's still helpful on a local scale to do what you can to try to improve indoor air quality. But I think the focus moving forward needs to be on essentially widespread legislation to ensure people are provided with healthy and safe environments. So that involves, one, a Clean Indoor Air Act society-wide, and two, implementation of ASHRAE 241. So those two things really, I think, are what needs to happen moving forward. The Ontario Society of Professional Engineers has one. They have, if you look on their website, they've been calling for both of these, and you could also write your representative asking for both of these. So I encourage everyone to also step up with that. Ultimately, it's a political solution moving forward to ensure, as opposed to what we've had to do until now, which is on an individual facility basis, try to do what you can to improve indoor air quality. So that's still helpful, that's still important, but as a permanent solution moving forward, we really need it to come from legislatures to require that we are provided with healthy and safe environments.
I thought I saw Martin with his hand up too,
Oh,
but
I'm
it's gone
sorry. I didn't
down.
look at the hands. Oh,
I saw a hand from Martin go up momentarily. Are you there, Martin?
I am. Oops, I got to move my little Lego man. Quick question about the CO2 and PM 2.5. I can kind of see some useful, I don't know, grad investigations on combinations of CO2 levels and PM 2.5. What got me thinking about that, thinking out loud, like you like to say, Kevin, is you mentioned Apricot and they're measuring just like the PM value. But if you have enough data and you've got the two together, would that be more helpful? Because the infectious disease, that's a particulate side. So if you have so you can have a higher CO2 level and a low PM level, and that might be air quality wise okay as well. I don't know if I'm off base or.
Yeah, because what you're probably saying is that, well, I think what you're saying is that when you've got the lower PM, your filtration is probably more effective.
More effective.
So it's complementary, isn't it, to the CO2 in a way?
It's
But I
possibly
totally understand
more
the part with
effective.
CO2. Yeah.
But I still think the limitations with PM 2.5 are too high. That, for example, how many dishes are being fried right now? That could significantly affect the PM 2.5 levels, right? Being able to accurately predict the generation of PM 2.5, I don't think we can do that. We can accurately predict the generation of carbon dioxide. There are papers saying this is the rate that people exhale it in these conditions based on this metabolic activity and based on this age range. So we can accurately predict the generation of CO2. We can't do that with PM 2.5. Again, we can say that, as a general trend, higher filtration leads to lower PM 2.5. So one, it's going to be a healthier environment, and two, you're more likely to have good filtration. But using the steady state concentration of PM 2.5 to assess the risk of airborne disease transmission, I don't think it's really possible to do that.
Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Matt, for the question. Any other thoughts there, Martin, before you disappear?
No, I'm okay.
Thanks, Martin.
well, sorry, I'm ripping off that.
Sorry, I just do want to say both of these are important as a full strategy to ensure a healthy and safe environment and good indoor air quality. Monitoring both carbon dioxide and PM 2.5 are both very helpful and good tools to have.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, that the PM 2.5, if in a constant environment, or relatively constant, like the Apricot Tree Cafe, sure, they're cooking there, they're generating, but they must have, I assume, giant HVAC, as most big kitchens do. But because it's a baseline, you can have a baseline and it's the same environment all the time. Is the population, the number of people, I don't know if you're ever going to actually be picking up what the building load is, I guess, with the particulate count. Yeah, I'm just interested because you said earlier about the limitation of CO2, Joey, being that, of course, if you've got fantastic filtration going on, you could have concerning CO2 levels, but you can, feel confident that the at least infectious disease transmission risk is reduced, not meaning it's gone, because of course you're close enough to other people, then there's a risk. It's not going to all disappear, but anyways, Yeah, that was just a comment. Same thing that you just said. It can be useful, but you have to be guarded, I think is really the point, right? So is there anything there's UV wise that anyone can use themselves, even at home? Where, you know, that may not be commercially licensed, but is there anything like in your dining room or TV room where people might gather to watch a football game or something? I'm just, you know, can
So-
we, yeah, go.
You can use portable air cleaners with UV, but again, I don't recommend that. You could just use a filter instead.
Yeah,
You can try to illegally buy a far UV fixture and put that in. I'm not going to officially recommend that, but that's another option. Upper room UV does not work for residential applications because you need to have a ceiling that's at least, I believe, 9 feet high or so. Typical residential is 8 feet. It's just the UV, there's going to be too much leakage into the lower room. So upper room UV is not really for residential applications. Far UV theoretically could be if it's, you know, regulated and safe.
It would
Okay.
make sense
open.
for some kind of jurisdictional scan to be done. You know, if they're used in healthcare settings in the US, then why are they being allowed? Or and maybe even I did read in South Korea, and there's other countries as well around the world, but it would be useful to do some kind of like national jurisdictional scan to understand why they're being used there, but they're not being used in Canada. I know that's outside of our control, but I think that would be a good thing for Health Canada to do if they haven't done it already.
Yeah, I'd be super interested in whether event spaces were, or even restaurants were, you know, starting to just, well, the Apricot Tree Cafe is the only one we know about, but, you know, where that would be starting to be a parameter that would be shared up front. So it's not just room occupancy and, you know, whether you can or have to order food or you can bring in your own food, but it's what is the, you know, the air, what are the air changes per hour, what kind of filtration, whether, you know, obviously not here, but eventually maybe whether there's UV protection, upper room UV in big gathering spaces, sports venues and places like that. But I don't know if we'll get there one day.
I know it's fantastic. They're really providing a model for how you can provide transparency about indoor air quality. And again, to get it from all other places is one, an Indoor Air Quality Act where you post what the readings are of the different pollutants in the space. Also with ASHRAE 241, there's what's called a building readiness plan where they have to provide documentation as to how much air cleaning is happening in the space and where it's coming from and all that. So that would also be a good way to provide any occupant with transparency, but Apricot Tree Cafe is really an example of how it can be done.
I had another thought too. I wouldn't mind just throwing this in, seeing we've got like 9 minutes left. And I know that did you want to do some kind of survey, Val? But I just wanted to kind of revisit CO2 using carbon dioxide monitoring. When you look at the World Health Organization risk assessment, you need to know something about the ventilation. And they do ask you if you've got mechanical ventilation and do you know air changes per hour as well. And I'm wondering, like, how reliable are, in your opinion, using carbon dioxide monitors? You know, you might have to do it a number of times in a room, perhaps, to look at decay curves, and then from the decay curve, you know, come up with a basic air changes per hour. Would that be useful as part of the risk assessment if you don't have the tools to actually, you know, measure the air coming in and the air going out of the room, for example?
So one, it's accurate. You can use carbon dioxide, the decay curve, to measure the air changes per hour ventilation. That can be done accurately and reliably. As far as air changes per hour, again, this was recommendations that occurred through the pandemic, in my personal opinion, and also in the opinion of many experts from ASHRAE 241. It's a mistake. It's not the right metric to assess risk. Airflow per person is a much more accurate way to assess risk. There is historical use of air changes per hour amongst the health community, and in healthcare standards, they use air changes per hour. But for example, you could have the same space, but one space has a ceiling twice the height. You could have the exact same risk, the exact same but the one that has twice the height is going to have half the air changes per hour because it has double the volume of the room. That's not helpful information when it comes to what the risk in the space is. So carbon dioxide is related, the steady state concentration of carbon dioxide is related to the airflow per person. So that's why it's very helpful. Air changes per hour is not necessarily the correct metric. It's in the words of an ASHRAE publication, it's oversimplified. It doesn't work too many of the times. In general, people understand it and it can be helpful in some cases, but it's not really what the accurate way of assessing risk would be.
Thanks, Joey. And I can't remember with the OSPI tool, the OSPI calculator, does that does go to liters per second per person as well, I think. And do you have in there the conversion of CO2 to liters per second per person in that tool?
Yes, it does. And you kind of caught me. I think we also have possibly air changes per hour. When we gave our guidance was 6 air changes per hour. I personally wasn't really in favor of that, but the committee wanted to do it, partially because there's existing healthcare standards at the time, and also it's easier for people to understand the concept of changing the air in a room. But now we haven't updated the calculator yet, but our guidance now is compliance with ASHRAE 241, not the 6 air changes per hour. Some places need much more, some places need much less.
Thanks.
Did we put a chat or a link to both the OSPI and the 241? Is that in your slides that we can post? Or I didn't go looking for it today to put in the chat.
I didn't put OSPI's current guidance in the slides.
I've got.
If you look at the Indoor Air Quality Committee on their website, they'll have this information there.
Okay. Okay.
And they're working now on publishing final versions of the documents, which include updated guidelines.
OSPI, Joey. OSPI.
Yes.
Okay, great.
So, see, Mira indicated a couple other places in Toronto, I assume, that have upgraded their HVAC system to no. So 2 other places we can patronize, I guess, and that they've at least recognized the value of clean air. I don't know what Queen Mother is. Is it a restaurant or an event venue and review cinema? So one thing I'm wondering before, I think we'll let everybody go a few minutes early since we don't have any more questions, but I guess I'd be interested in topics for future webinars. We're probably going to take a break, at least in July, but we're going to bring it back again in August and then start trying to share. I heard a really good talk at the Institute of Pandemic talk about long COVID research from a McMaster researcher this morning. That was quite good, but they did not record it and they're not releasing the slides. So I'll have to go search that person out to see if they'll come and talk to us. But of course, we'll want to record it. So anyways, I think long COVID is something, and its impact on workplaces and its prevention and mitigation, I think. And then H5N1 we're all concerned about, and just infectious disease prevention in general. So otherwise, I don't know, Joey, do you have any final words? And Kevin, you can then wrap up if you want.
Just start like once again, Joey, we really appreciate your efforts here and your dedication, generosity, and sharing your knowledge and time and pulling the slides together. So I just really want to thank you on behalf of myself and OCO as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Have a good, healthy, and safe summer, everybody, and we'll see you in August probably. Take care. And thanks, Tony, for all your tech support. Keeping these
Thanks,
WebEx
Tony.
going. Bye-bye.